Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with James Israel and Rob Rogers. They are from Humor Times, which is a political satire magazine. James is the publisher and the editor, and Rob is an award-winning editorial cartoonist, formerly of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Hey James, Rob, thank you very much for coming on. Thanks for reaching out.
Sure. Glad to be
Thanks for
here.
having us. Yeah, thanks.
Um, that's okay. One thing I've kind of been bemoaning for the last little while is lack of political satire. And I honestly didn't really know about Humor Times at all. And it was kind of refreshing to see it because I don't know, I've always been of the mind that humor is one of the best ways to get through to people. And especially if you want to critique something. So if you do it in a funny way, even those that are somewhat extreme can be reached in that way than they couldn't by other things. So I'm just kind of curious about like the magazine, what your drive is behind it, and then try to kind of go from there.
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly why my inspiration for founding it, really. Um, I started it back in 1991, just as the first Gulf War was ending, um, and modeled it after the Santa Cruz Comic News, which was kind of the probably one of the first ones, if not the first one. Um, and really that was the inspiration is that humor is such a good way to talk about these things. Politics can get heavy, and but political satire is just the perfect tool for bringing to people's attention the issues and making them laugh about it at the same time. And in doing so, I think you can potentially kind of disarm people with the humor and help them see something that they might not have seen, a point of view that they might not, naturally uh, adhere to, um, and maybe for just a moment, kind of crack the armor there and open up the discussion so that they can see both sides of an issue.
I mean, I use South Park as an example. So, I mean, for a few seasons there, South Park was making a lot of fun of call it woke, call it progressive, call it far left, like whatever you want to call it. They were making a lot of fun of that, and I found it funny. There's no problem, laughed. And then this season, when they came out and started making fun of Trump, now, okay, again, I laughed. It was funny. It was well done. Good on them. But then you had that reaction from whatever MAGA or like Trump supporters who were pissed off that, hey, why are you making fun of Trump? Okay, yeah, like I said, they did concentrate on the left for a while, but they are pretty, even-handed when it comes to who they'll make fun of. Like they'll make fun of just about everyone. So, like, are you seeing that kind of stuff? Like, are you seeing, okay, hey, we made fun of this, and now we're switching a little bit. We're making fun of something else. You're doing political satire, so you have to kind of go where the politics is, right? Basically, like that. I'm just curious about that.
I mean, I can talk about that a little bit. As a political cartoonist, you really are sort of going with whatever's in the news at the time. But I do have readers that would always ask me, well, why don't you draw something about the Democrats, or why don't you, go after them a little bit? And my answer is, well, they're not in power right now, and when they are in power, I do go after them if it's deserved. And it just so happens that we're in a time period now where we have a president who's doing everything he can to dismantle, the world as we know it, democracy and justice and all of that. So there's a lot more for me to draw. He's also just, he can't help himself. He has to put something out there, 17 times a day. So there's a lot to cover. But no, I think one of the biggest compliments I used to get when I was at the newspaper was, you know, readers, writing to me and saying, and this happened especially after I got fired. I had readers come forward and say to me, I disagree with, 75% of what you say, but I really love your work, So they clearly were reading it, they were getting something out of it, even if they didn't agree with it. And that's a kind of a different world than we live in now. There's just I think there's just too much polarization, and and people aren't able to kind of exit their silos long enough to see the humor on the other side.
I don't know how you can be siloed at this point. It's just, I find that if you're siloed, I don't know. Okay, I'm doing this obviously very small sample size here. I'm talking with my friends and stuff, and it doesn't matter if they were, okay, I'm in Canada, so we don't, we're not voting for Trump or whatever. But if they were in favor of Trump, or if they, were up here, the conservatives, or, they were going for the Liberal Party or whatever, I'm starting to see like some some cracks, and so some information from the other side's coming in. I don't know. I think it's just far better not to solo yourself at all. It's just, hey, I think Trump doing the peace deal, that was a good thing. Now, me saying that should not be taken as me as like I'm wholesale all on the MAGA boat. And conversely, yes, I know they're not in power, but if a Democrat brings up a bill or something that's that I like, whatever, hey, look, so and so is doing this and this is good, and it should be the same thing. But I find it's, if you accept one thing or you agree with one thing that the other side does, you're expected to wholesale accept everything they do, or that's put on you. And so that's why I'm like, I just, not the whole politically homeless thing, but I just, I couldn't care less about teams at this moment. It's been like that for a while. It's just like, okay, what is the policy, and what are you, what is that based on? And that's, I like, I'm at that
Well, that
point,
would be
right
nice
now.
if people were generally like that. I think in the
Yeah.
past it used to be a lot more that way, but that's when people were viewing the same news broadcasts, same print media, and the media in general was pretty even-handed, and so we all had a common information source, you know. And nowadays, the reason people get siloed is they start paying attention only to the information sources that fit their preconceived, way of looking at the world, and so they don't look outside of that. And then it just keeps getting reinforced, and they think, oh man, everything I read, everything I see, all
Mhm.
my friends say this, so it must be true. And the other side must just be crazy. I'm not going to look at anything they say. And so, unfortunately, in this age with social media, it's just way too easy to get siloed. And I think that's really the problem.
Something you mentioned there, like this, I talked about this with a couple of people. You had the big three networks, and then when Fox came along, so whatever the four, but everyone would talk about Seinfeld at the water cooler on the Friday mornings. We had those shared stories. I know with political cartoons, I mean, if you're writing a satire piece, that's one thing, but if it's just a cartoon, you're telling a story really quickly. But at least in Montreal, like we would talk about the cartoon that was in the local paper, that like that to a certain extent. So, but we don't have that anymore. It's all niche. Game of Thrones comes along, or The Sopranos, or you've got like these certain little small things where a large chunk of the population is watching it, but it's still not the same effect of the last episode of MASH, or Who Shot JR. Like, date myself there, but yeah, it's we don't have that. We don't have that
Yeah,
shared story.
I was just giving a talk last night where people are asking, well, do you think, because we were talking about that very thing about, three networks and the shared community of what we were viewing, and even the shared truth, like all three networks would agree that the sky is blue, you know and the earth is round, and
Yes.
now that's different. But we were talking about that time period, and somebody asked the question, well, do you think that like vinyl, for instance, when that sort of went the way of CDs and cassettes, everyone thought vinyl was dead, but now it's sort of making a resurgence. And they said, well, do you think newspapers will come back? And I don't think it's quite the same. I mean, I think that unfortunately, we're still getting, I think that, yes, some local newspapers will pop up and out of nostalgia, people will buy them. But I don't think that it's going to save these giant corporate newspapers. The money just isn't there. And so you can do little niche things here and there. But as far as siloing, I think it's also just, because our way of gathering information and gathering news has changed so dramatically since those days of Seinfeld. Um, there really isn't a way to not be somewhat siloed, and it's not even intentional. It's oftentimes your algorithm. You choose something to look at, and then your algorithm sends you more of those things. And sometimes it is intentional if you choose to follow certain people on, say, Substack or on you watch Fox News or whatever it might be, then you're going to get more of that. But unfortunately, the economics of say like a family newspaper in a city the size of Pittsburgh, the economics just aren't there to create that community in the same way that they used to. And so people are sort of forced to do everything in their own little space, in their own digital space.
You can try all kinds of things, and I used to fiddle around with it, even when the algorithm wasn't as, enhanced as it is now. It was really difficult not to have it feed you stuff. So I mean, there is that. I think also part of the problem is there's just too much of it. We've treated someone in the early 1900s using a brush and like one of those washing boards or like I don't know, like using one of those to like do laundry as opposed to, an automatic washer, you know, like now, like whatever, a stackable washer and dryer that you can fit in a corner basically. That's great. That's technology helping you out, but we treated information in the same manner, and it's who
Mhm.
can get it fastest. I mean, we're at the mercy of that now because there's so much garbage out there. And I mean, oh, in a lot of these things, I don't care right, left, conservative, liberal. There's so much garbage that comes from all corners. It's harder and harder for people. Not only are you prisoner of whatever the algorithm is sending you, but it's harder and harder for people to the good from the bad. I mean, like I said, there's so much of it.
Yeah, uh, I will push back a little bit on that idea that I don't think they're equal in the sense that the garbage is coming from both sides. I do think that there are extremists on both sides for sure that perpetuate conspiracies. But I don't think that on the left you have major news stations perpetuating lies and conspiracies the way Fox News or the way OAN or some of these other stations do. And I think that there is a difference when you get down to yes, maybe they are choosing to cover the liberal politics on MSNBC more than they are the right-wing politics, but they're not lying about things, and I think that's the difference. And Fox has been sued.
Uh, okay, but I'm not even. I'm not even. Sorry, it's not that I'm disagreeing there. I'm not even talking about Fox and like I'm not talking about the major players. I'm talking just the amount of stuff that if you Google, let's just say, you're gonna get so much stuff that's it's from little small sources. It's from like, and it just they're paying more in advertising or whatever, so their
Yeah,
link comes up first. I'm not even talking about unfortunately because of the polarization, whatever. But if you're on, okay, MSNBC is your go-to. If you see something from Fox, you're going to say, "Oh, that's Fox." I don't care. If Fox is your go-to, and you see something from MSNBC, you're just going to say, "Oh, that's MSNBC. That's garbage. I'm not going to bother." But if you see it from some other weird source or whatever, like it's I'm talking about like that kind of stuff. And like I'm not, like I don't want to get into, oh, this side, because like I said, I don't have a side. I don't really in this. I just, but they're okay. Biden's dementia. I mean, like he didn't have dementia. It didn't start the night of the debate.
Hmm.
That went on for a while, and they kept buying the party line. They kept pushing it. And I'm sorry, like even like Jake Tapper's book, like he must have been researching that book during the election, so things must have been coming up, and not a thing was mentioned. Like I'm, so there's stuff like that as well. And but like I don't want to get into that. I'm just saying the amount of garbage that comes out, and I'm not talking about the big players. I'm just talking about people who say, yeah, we're a progressive this, or we're a, you know, patriot front, or whatever. Like they're putting out stuff, and there's so much of it, and it's hard for people to parse good from bad.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that one of the hardest things is coming from a newspaper background where every story was vetted and every letter to the editor had to be checked for sources 3 times, and they would call the person up and verify their address. So there wasn't any of this, instant like commenting on like you do on the websites.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's hard now to see these things pop up and have no idea what the sourcing is or where they came from or whether it's a real journalism site or not. I agree with that.
yeah. No, and it's. I mean, okay, I don't want to completely derail this because, uh, but so I did a lot of work overseas. I was in war zones and I was in disaster areas. And I mean, okay, so I'm in Haiti after the earthquake. Hurricane Thomas hits. I'm in Port-au-Prince. You know, we had some really heavy rainfall, but I never felt threatened at any point. Like, there was high winds, but I mean, I see the CNN reporting on it, and I'm watching it. Oh yeah, and we're live, and I'm seeing where they're filming from, and I'm like, okay, that we put, at that point, it'd been there almost a year, and I'd been passing by this creek every day, and it was the same level of water, and they're standing by the creek saying, "Oh, we're standing in front of this creek," blah 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 blah. I'm like, but
Hmm.
it's always like that. They're making it, and or they're talking about all these like hurricane strong winds, and oh, it's it's getting really bad out here. I'm in Port-au-Prince. We're renting a house. I walk outside to have a smoke. I light up my lighter and the flame is straight up. It's not even like flickering in the wind. And I mean, they're there live and they're like, yeah, we're here live in Port-au-Prince. And it's like, I mean, it's not. I saw stuff in Afghanistan and it was from all networks, um, where they're reporting on something. I was on the base when it happened. Then I see the report later on and I'm like, that's a lie. That's wrong. So I lost trust in media like in the early 2000s when I started working overseas and I saw this and I was like, okay, you guys are lying. And so I'm okay, I'm not, it wasn't all of them. It wasn't everyone. Like I'm at a point where I don't trust any organization. I trust journalists. There are journalists I trust and I'll listen to them. I'll follow them. Even if I disagree with them, I'll trust them to be giving me honest opinions and honest information. At least, like if they're talking about a study, they'll link me to the study. I can read it. I might disagree with their interpretation or how they see it, but at least, like I said, I know
Well,
they're honest.
a
And
lot
that's where
of
I am at
the
that. This,
political satire is really making fun of media itself, and deservedly so, and pointing out that sort of thing. How they're getting a lot of stories wrong, and how there's a lot of tunnel vision. There's a lot of you know just trying to get the most sensational thing out there to get eyeballs to bump their ratings and so on. So that's part of political satire too. Um, by the way, can I mention our website,
oh, for sure.
humortimes.com? I hope people will go there, check it out, and also look for
Yeah.
um, the link to our subscriptions and look at the free. We have a free digital version of one of the most recent issues, and then people can also get a free 3 issue subscription. So you can really check it out and get either the digital version if you prefer that, or even print for free for 3 issues and check it out. I hope people will go there and do that right now so they don't forget and check out what the Humor Times is about. We feature a lot of different political cartoonists, including Rob Rogers, and we kind of put the stories together um, to form like it's like a review of the news, and it's like a news story because each page will be all on one subject, even though it's a whole bunch of different cartoons. And it's just a way of reviewing the news with humor. And it's really a lot of fun. So I hope people will check that out. Um, but I hope we can steer the discussion more to political satire because that's what me and Rob are
Oh
all
yeah, I know that's
about.
yeah. Like I said, sorry. I just yeah, but okay. I was no, but just that's the one thing. Like things are so ridiculous. How do you satire it? Like I mean,
It's
it's not.
already ridiculous. Yeah.
Um,
So, yeah. I think
yeah, like okay, like something in the past. Like how do you satire someone throwing a shoe at at Bush Jr. Right? Like like that in itself is silly. But I mean, like it's gotten
right.
so beyond that
I'll
point
let
now.
Rob speak to that. That's his job.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of the strangest thing that's happened in recent years because, we would always, part of the tool of the cartoonist is to and the satirist is to use exaggeration and caricature, and Trump is such a caricature of himself that it's almost impossible to go beyond what he's doing. But, we have to try. And and so, it is, yeah, like that story you mentioned about George W. Bush having the shoe thrown at him by the reporter. I did a cartoon. I don't remember what it was, but I remember satirizing that. And with Bush, I mean, he was. I feel like he was a good one to satire because his ears just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger as his as his term went on. And by the end, I was drawing him that he looked like a little tiny monkey with big ears. Um, but but that was sort of a nice way to satirize him but at the same time putting him in situations that were very serious, like the Iraq War and the WMD lies that ended up starting, causing him to go to war. So, yeah, I mean, but it is more difficult now. I think it is. People have become numb to the things that are happening in the White House right now, and I think that you try to exaggerate it, and sometimes I'm looking at my sketchbook and I'm thinking, yeah, well, making him, a giant Godzilla, stomping on all the norms of society, that doesn't work anymore. I mean, everybody gets that, it's like nobody cares because they elected him again. It's sort of like, well, so you have to kind of pick and choose, but it is difficult. I will say that.
On the satire front, I know some about U.S. and Canadian political satire. I don't know enough in Europe, but I'm just wondering, is that more of an American tradition, or was that going on in like UK and France earlier than that? Because I mean, I've seen some from like the 1800s. There's one I remember they called it the U.S. River Ganges, and they had like alligators with
That's
like the
Thomas Nast.
miters,
That's an
so they were
American
like the
cartoonist. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just wondering, like, is this more of like an American style critique or satire, or is that did they have something like that coming from
Oh well,
Europe first?
Daumier was
Would
doing
you
it way
know?
before us back in France. So, and he even got jailed by the king for drawing him as a pear. So, um, and I don't know the
Okay,
exact year, but I think it was the 1700s. I could be wrong, but yeah,
okay,
he's been doing. He's sort of Daumier is sort of called the very first political cartoonist of note in France. So he's sort of where a lot of people start. And then Thomas Nast did become the most famous, not only political cartoonist, but the highest paid entertainer in America in the 1800s when he was working. And he invented the Santa Claus and the image for Santa Claus, and he created the elephant and the donkey. So those are part of his repertoire. But he was great, and that's sort of what started it here. But I think it's no, I think satire has been around for a long, long time. They were probably doing it in the caves, back in the day when they were drawing on the cave walls.
Okay, and I mean, I'm just kind of curious. It's just like if you're doing political satire, especially if you're doing the cartoons, that's almost like the court jester role, right? You're going there, your
No,
purpose.
no, the
No, I
reason
mean,
I'm laughing is
I
because
don't,
I drew the court gesture for a cartoon recently, and that's the one that made the cover of the recent Humor Times. There it is. That's Trump as the king, and the gesture is has just been hung by the neck, and Trump is saying, "Now that's funny." And
Jimmy
that was after the
Kimmel and all that, you know.
yeah, that was the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing. But anyway, yes, I see somebody like Jimmy Kimmel and what we do as cartoonists as that role of the court jester, but in a different way than say maybe back in the Middle Ages. This more it's more about
yeah.
politics and keeping people honest, and back then it was just to entertain the king.
Again, it's just it could be wrong in this, but it was the gesture was also to entertain the king, but at the same way he could point out the foibles of the king in a funny way, like he could, not being insulting, but you know, to a certain extent, like the gesture would have a little bit more leeway than a regular courtier, in the
Depending on the
court or
king,
something like
probably.
that.
Some kings
Yeah, yeah,
could laugh at
obviously,
themselves, maybe, and
yeah,
some couldn't. But I would think that with certain monarchs, that would be very risky. And it's the same now.
yeah.
Political leaders, some of them, can laugh at themselves. Some can't. Trump is notoriously thin-skinned. Any criticism whatsoever, and he wants to be the authoritarian and find some law or some way of knocking you off the air if you criticize him. So, whereas I think a lot of other presidents on both parties were much more welcoming of that and realizing that free speech is important and political satire is a part of free speech. And I think, political satire has a very important role and must be preserved because that's the best way to keep leaders and political parties of all stripes honest. It's extremely important in that regard, and because you can talk seriously about the issues, and columnists and such do that, and that's of course just as important. But the political satire, I think, probably has a farther reach because not everyone's going to read those serious columns, but everyone likes a good laugh. Everyone likes cartoons. Um, and it's just a great way of kind of leveling the playing field, and nobody is too big to be made fun of.
Okay, not necessarily because Humor Times, I mean, the magazine itself is satire, but let's just say, whatever, any newspaper, if they had a satire column along with like a cartoon or something, could that be used as they're going to satirize some policy? We're going to get rid of the homeless by shooting all the homeless. Okay, like that's your policy, so you're going to write a satire about that. Could you use that to like say, okay, here's an in-depth story on that policy? So someone reads a satire, finds it funny. If they get interested enough, do they go read the story? Is there any kind of way to link the two together? I'm just kind of curious about
Possible.
that.
There are cartoonists that have columns as well, and they get pretty serious in their columns. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the satire column is basically the same thing that I'm doing, except with words. And they, you know, usually go into a little more detail, maybe, or and have some more room to sort of get that joke off the ground or whatever. But it's sort of the same animal, really. So I'm not sure what you're asking exactly, but
No, no, but what I was just wondering is like, okay, you do a cartoon, it doesn't even like, and someone looks at that cartoon and it's a cartoon satirizing some
Mhm.
policy or something that's going on. And then in the paper itself, there's an article. Like I'm just saying in like, let's say New York Times or Boston Globe or whatever, there's, political cartoon about it, policy X, and at the same time, political columnist has done an
and you're
article
talking
on
about
that
a
policy.
serious
So
column,
using
yeah.
a
But
serious column, but I'm saying like using like the newspaper using
right,
the satire as a hook to get someone in to
right.
read the serious
I think
column.
that's kind of true. I mean, that's how the
Like it,
editorial page tends to be. They've got one or two political cartoons there, and the rest of the pages is serious writing.
Yeah, there was a time when I would coordinate with the editors, and if they were going to run an editorial on a local story that I could also do, that I was planning to do a cartoon about anyway, it was a nice little, pairing of that. Um, but and I do think that all the material we're gathering for the cartoon is based on news stories. So usually the news story comes first, and then we come up with the idea and we either criticize what's happening or we agree with what's happening. Normally, we're doing cartoons of things we disagree with because those make the best political cartoons. It's hard to be a cheerleader when you're doing political cartoons, but yeah, that happens all the time in terms of like both addressing the same topics.
I mean, you mentioned free speech and you mentioned stuff going on there, but like, what do you think when you look around the world? At least in the US, you have the First Amendment, but if you look at what's going on in the UK, like some of the stuff that they're planning up here in Canada, the government is reserving the right to, if the law passes, the government can cut any single individual off from the internet in Canada they want. No questions asked, no trial, no nothing. It's up to the government. It's up to the ministry to decide. If the minister decides, then that person's cut off. The ISP can't complain, and the person's not allowed to complain after they've had their internet cut off. Like they are cut off from the internet. And I mean that's a law that's been proposed. It's going through Parliament right now.
You're not
Okay.
talking about people who break the law on the internet, like who either are
No,
doing
no, no, no,
something
no, no.
that
It's
because that happens here too, but that yeah,
no,
if
no,
you're
no.
committing crimes, then
It's
you get denied.
no, no. It's not. Hey, you were caught selling drugs on the internet, or you were caught doing X on the internet. This is the government has decided that they want you off. I mean, there was a law in Canada that they were about to pass, but then they called the election, or Trudeau resigned. He stopped Parliament, then he resigned, and so it never got voted through. But in that law, they, I mean, I can get you the wording exactly, but if they thought so, if the government thought or the authorities thought that you were going to post something online that might radicalize someone, not that you had and it did, but that you might post something, you could face 6 months house arrest, $75,000 fine, and you're cut off from the internet for those 6 months. If they thought that you could, so like I'm not. This is not a again not a defensive term. At least you have the First Amendment. Like we have nothing like that here. If you look at what's going on in the UK, there's nothing like that there. I mean, if you look at what the fire does and like some of the reporting coming out now, because they're going more general than just education, is you know, free speech is under attack pretty much globally. Like there's not one liberal democracy left that is protecting free speech. And like I said, you guys are lucky in the States. You
For the
have the First
moment.
Amendment. And as long as the population, yeah, yeah, no, but as long as the population is in favor of free speech, it's there. If you can get, if the population's against it, and you know, if a party has that supermajority, they can go through and they can change the amendment. But it's not easy to get done. But at least you still, it's.
So is the
But
Canadian law you're talking about C-63?
okay, C-63 is no longer the one. Because but that was the one where you could have that happen. Now there's C8 and there's C9. C9 is a new hate crimes law because they said they wanted to use it because of all the like there were synagogues being shut up and everything during the anti-Israel protests for the last 2 years. But they don't need that law because there's already a section of the criminal code that deals with it, which they're not enforcing anyways. Then there's Bill C8, which is the one where um, the government, if they want, they can cut you off from the internet.
So from I just looked it up, and it says they're proposing like a regulatory body. So it'd be like uh, several
Yeah,
people or whatever would have to agree on it, and it's supposed to protect harmful content like child sexual abuse material.
it's there. If you're talking about Bill C-63, or which one are you talking about?
This one is C-63, but it sounds like those others are kind of
Okay,
evolution of this
okay,
one.
even C-63 when you if you'd follow like I'm not disputing what you're reading like, but if you followed the debates that were going on over it and as things were progressing, it wasn't just about protecting children. It was like
Hate
I said,
speech.
it was, but also like I said, if they thought you were going to post something, they could put you under house arrest. Not that you had posted something. So that's already getting rid of
Yeah, that's
um
going too far for sure.
you know, yeah, yeah, but I mean,
Hot
like, you haven't
police.
even committed a crime. Yeah, you haven't even committed a crime.
Yeah,
That's like pre-crime. Like it's a minority report there, but it's you're no longer innocent until proven guilty, right? So that like but that one got scrapped because they called the election. Trudeau retired, resigned, and they called the election, so that never went through. Now the ones they have going through are C8 and C9, and there's another one called C2, which if that passes, they can again go to any professional. Sorry, I don't want to derail this, but it was just like you're talking about free speech, and I just like it's under
Yeah,
huge
I
attack
would
everywhere in the
agree.
world.
I would agree, but
Um,
you also have to remember we have
and
a
but
I
like
agree
really
with that.
great tradition in Canada of political cartooning as well. We just had our annual meeting last year in October in Montreal, and we met with the Canadian cartoonists and the American cartoonists all came together, and yeah, I mean, if those laws are trying to be passed, then those are the guys to try to, or guys and girls, I guess. There's a couple women cartoonists. Those are the ones that should be fighting against it and speaking out, and I guess your voters need to do that too. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know your
yeah,
constitution well enough
Yeah,
to
there's a
be able
lot
to
of
comment
bad
on that, but
laws. There's a lot of bad laws that get proposed every, here too, but hopefully people are sane enough
it,
in government to counteract that. And I hope that
yeah, but
doesn't happen there because that would be very drastic.
see, I mean, the things. So our system is different, but anyways, I don't want to get into a parliament. Like the party in power, they have the votes, they can pass whatever they want, and it's not like the checks and
I'm,
balances that you
I'm
guys have.
laughing because we don't have that right now.
So
Well, right
no, but
now, for
you
example, yeah,
yeah, yeah, okay,
right.
but I mean, like you have some sort of stuff built in. Like we don't have that at all. The party in power, they have the votes, they can pass any law they want, and it's the debates at some points are just moot because you know what's going to happen when because if they're voted down, that the government then falls and you have to call an election. So to save their own hides, a lot of times they'll vote against their principles because they want to keep their seat. It's
Yeah.
it's
Well,
um
right now we've got, you know, one party in power, and it's the same thing. they can do, and they are doing anything they want. But yeah, if the government is divided here, like one house is Democrat and the other is Republican, then it's pretty much nothing gets done. So that's not great either. But uh, yeah, democracy's hard, and
Yeah.
but it's
Beats
still
the alternative.
better than everything else. So yes.
Yeah, I know that's it. Like, but it just, I mean, like your problem, you just define it in a nutshell. But like, how do you get a point like that across through a cartoon or through satire? Because I mean, it's almost like you have to break people out of a sleep. Like, hey, you know, wake up.
I
Like,
mean, I recently
Yeah.
did a
this is how
cartoon
screwed up
about
we
the
are.
shutdown that was
Yes.
a little ambiguous, but it basically had, the Democrats and the Republicans are in a tar pit and they're dinosaurs. They're both dinosaurs. Because I was trying to comment on how the two-party system really is too old and doesn't really work. And and one's blaming the other for getting them stuck in the tar pit. And then meanwhile, there's this asteroid coming down and it's Trump's head, and he's like, woo, woo, and so everybody's going to die. It's like, that's how I drew it in a cartoon.
Okay, that's kind of like
Oh,
it just
right.
made me
Yeah,
think of
yeah.
what was the end of Doctor
Yeah.
Strangelove, where he's
Yeah,
always
I drew.
like,
I once drew a Dr. Strangelove sort of homage with George W. Bush coming down on the bomb, and the bomb is labeled, uh, WMD lies, and he's just like, woo, he's coming down.
so you just mentioned like with certain cartoons, like you can, I mean, there is subtlety to it, but it's also one frame. So like, is there a balance between, okay, you don't want to like just bash people over the head with a sledgehammer, but is it like if it's too subtle, are they not going to understand it in just the one frame?
I mean,
Like, do you have
there's
to try to
certainly
like write a
plenty of
balance between
times where
that, or?
people have said, "I don't get it," and sometimes even my editor would say that when I worked at the paper, and sometimes when I would explain it to him, then he'd be like, "Oh, okay." So you have to assume a certain amount of knowledge that the reader has. If you're drawing something, say where you're using, like a king and a court jester, you figure they know what that is. Or if you're using the Wizard of Oz as a metaphor, they know what that is. Most people. But if you get into the more, some of the other things that people aren't aware of, then you do have to maybe put a label here and there to explain it. But yeah, you can be too subtle. I mean, sometimes, but I tend to like the cartoons that are, more subtle than as you said, bashing you over the head. But it does seem like with the politics the way they are these days, it just feels like if you're not bashing somebody over the head, then you're not going to get your point across either.
What you just mentioned there, uh, having to like have a common knowledge, so understanding what a court gesture is and stuff. Do you think with again with what we were talking about earlier, like no common stories anymore, that's going to be harder and harder to do because if everyone's got their niche common knowledge, where like yeah, okay, it's the community of
Right.
surfboarders, and that's like that's the only people you're talking to. You're not going to have an understanding of someone
Mhm.
who like treks the desert or whatever, right? Like, um, but do you see that as a possible threat, or is like that something to overcome? Like, how do you
Well,
get
for
beyond
me,
that?
I sometimes have to ask my wife, does she understand this? Is it over her head or, and I think the problem now that I'm older, I think my problem is my references are all old references, and so I don't have any of the new references that the young people use. So I'm not drawing cartoons about those things, but I think, unless it's something that's in pop culture, in the news that I've read about. But it's a game of percentages. You're always going to have some people that don't get it because they're not following that story. and you get some people who do get it, and you just have to decide, is this worth drawing? Am I going to reach the people that I want to reach? And in the end, a lot of times I just say, you know what? I like this one. I'm going to draw it because it makes me laugh, you know.
You know, one thing we do with the paper is, like I mentioned before, like a whole page will be, or even two pages will be on one subject. And I always kind of come from the point of view of, okay, maybe the reader hasn't been up on this particular story. And the cartoons are arranged in a way, and we have a what I call quips above each cartoon. So it's like a something I write that kind of strings it all together. And so it tells the news story. And sometimes the cartoons are, excuse me, are in kind of chronological order because things can happen and a cartoon is drawn about it, and then the story develops and another cartoon will be about that stage of the story. So anyway, the whole page is written in such a way that even if you haven't been keeping up on the story, it'll introduce the ideas of what's happening early on in the story and string it together. And so it kind of brings you into the
It's almost
story,
like a
even if you haven't
narration, you
been
know, where you
paying
say, you
attention.
know, this is happening, and then the cartoon,
Yeah,
and then this happened, and then the cartoon, you know.
right. So I'm trying to string it together and not give anything away while doing it about the cartoon that's coming up because you don't want to give the joke away. But so that's kind of how we approach that as far as people maybe
Yeah,
not
and then
knowing about that particular
if I'm
subject.
drawing a cartoon, I'm
But
sorry,
but
James,
then
but if I'm drawing a cartoon and I think people aren't going to get it, I will put a little caption at the top that says, you know, news item, um, you know, something this happened, and then the cartoon will be an exaggeration of that, and it'll go into that. So that happens too.
I was also just trying to think more of not that everyone's because I mean I know that for a fact that people aren't reading the same stuff and there's a lot of things I'm include myself in that like there's a lot of stuff going on that don't know about because you can't know everything but it was more just that okay the court jester that's something that everyone recognizes or you mentioned the Wizard of Oz you know that's again something because people have seen it but
cultural references, talking about,
yeah, they're like yeah, and then now, but you're gonna have less and less of that because
right?
I mean, it's just you know, it's
Well, people watch
like
their own
demographics.
shows, you know, for
Yeah,
instance, like you got all this stuff on the different streaming networks that are shows that are what do you call it? You know, one after the other. They're all strung together. So you got two or three seasons of one thing, and a lot of people are going to know about that, but a lot of people aren't because there's just so many of them. You know, you can't watch them all. So then you got all these small cultural references that if you try to use that in a cartoon, a lot of people aren't going to know what you're talking about. So is that kind of what you mean?
yeah. Or okay, I'll give you another example. So this is something that happened to me. So I don't know if you saw the movie Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman, Roy uh, Schreider. Um, anyways, there's a point in it where there's a dentist torturing someone, and he's just keeps asking, "Is it safe?"
Uh,
Then in the 90s, that movie came out in the 70s, and in the 90s, there was some satire movie with Charlie Sheen. It was a
Mhm.
satire of like of like the army movies, you know, like Navy SEALs and stuff like that. And at the end of the movie, he falls down a flight of stairs, lands in a dentist chair, and the dentist takes a drill and starts saying, "Is it safe?" Now, me and my buddies were laughing because we knew where it came from, but then there was people who were laughing because they found it funny, but they were, you know, we were in our mid to late 20s. These people were in their like 16, 17, something like that. They were laughing because a guy fell down a flight of stairs and landed in a dentist chair, and the dentist starts drilling him, and they find that funny. We were laughing at the same thing, finding it funny, but for two completely different reasons because we didn't have that shared story. We didn't have,
Yeah, that
like, they
sometimes
didn't
happens
know
with
that reference.
cartoons that I do. People will look at it and laugh, and then they'll be laughing at the image of it, and then they'll miss the subtlety of whatever reference I'm making, in the background, like the Marathon Man or something like that. But it's always funny because it's like, well, they laughed anyway, so I'm doing something right. And then when I tell them what the nuance
Yeah.
is, then they laugh again and they say, "Oh, well, that makes it even better." So so you just kind of have to hope that everybody gets something out of it.
Right.
Um, Look, I don't want to take too much of your time, but just finishing up with your magazine. So, are you? I mean, obviously you're gonna stick with the satire and stuff, but is it only available on the web right now, or are you gonna like plans to? Because I know like there's a couple of places that opened up. One recently was Country Highway, where they're actually selling paper copies. I'm just wondering, like, because you'd mentioned like local newspapers and stuff, but I mean, are you gonna stick your magazine just basically online, or would you ever considering doing like small print runs or something?
Well, we are available in print. Oh,
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were only online.
no, it's
My
it's
mistake.
available in print. It's been in print since '91. Um,
Okay.
but you can subscribe online. Uh, and it's not we're not in a lot of stores. So you pretty much have to order it online to get the subscription, but it is in print. It's monthly, shows up once a month. But then there's also the digital version. If you prefer that, it's a lot cheaper and get it all over the world without having to pay for the mailing costs, you know. Um, and then if you subscribe to the print version, you also have access to the digital. So, yeah, it's different ways of looking at it. I'd like to be in more stores, but that's really hard. For a while, we were in some Barnes and Nobles, but it's kind of hard to stay in those spots because there's so much competition, and we weren't well known enough that we would get enough sales, so we didn't end up staying there. So basically, we're resigned to trying to get people to sign up online. But
Good.
more and more people are becoming aware of it, and the readers we do have love it and are very loyal. So I'm hoping your readers will, or your viewers will check us out, uh, see
Oh
what they
no,
think.
for sure. I'll put the links in,
Yeah,
but no, again, apologies. I thought it was only online. I
no,
didn't even,
it's
yeah.
in print,
But
like I showed you.
uh,
There it is.
uh, okay, sorry. I thought it was like that was just a uh picture.
Okay,
But
yeah.
you mentioned like people were talking about going back to vinyl, and I see that now as well because there was a couple of used. Um, I used to buy a lot of used vinyl there when I was a teenager, and they're they had they'd shut down a couple of their locations across Montreal, and now they're opened up another one. So they've got back. They used to have three. Now then they went down to one. Now they've got two, and they're selling records again. And so like I'm just wondering, would you see like a resurgence in people buying print newspapers, or even like going back to bookstores? Like forget like you'd mentioned Barnes and Noble and stuff, but if everyone's buying books off Amazon, like are there those little small local bookstores anymore? Because I know there's still a couple in Montreal, but they're always under threat of closing.
Yeah, there's a lot
Like,
fewer of them, but they're survivors. And I think the same is true with print magazines of all sorts. There's always going to be some people who like that tactile sense of having it in their hands. And there may be a resurgence of that, a small one at least, but I don't think it'll ever get back to, where it was. Um, the people,
yeah,
it's just too convenient to look stuff up online, and people are used to that
yeah,
now.
But okay, maybe it's just because I'm old school. Like I used okay, I worked a lot overseas, like I mentioned, and I traveled around a lot. So it was great to have like a Kindle or something because, I'm
Hmm.
traveling. I don't have to travel with boxes of books.
Right.
But ever since I stopped doing that, and I'm, back in Canada, and I want my books. Like I refuse to buy anything digitally. I did it as a convenience, and a lot of the stuff I had digitally, you know, I ended up buying the hard covers, like, the hard copies anyways, because I liked them. And um, so maybe I should do that with my news and stuff as well, because that's the one thing, like, yeah, why am I going to get a newspaper every day? I can read it online, whereas a book, I want it in my
Yeah, well,
hand. And,
I
you know,
certainly hope that newspapers make a
uh,
resurgence, but yeah, as James was saying, it won't be the same as it was. In the same way that we're seeing a resurgence here in Pittsburgh with bookstores coming back, but there's only like a spattering of them that are doing it, and but people are flocking to them. They're busy every Saturday and every day during the week too. So I think that people do have a
yeah,
nostalgia for that kind of thing, but it won't come back all the way just because people are so used to doing everything digital now. It's not going to happen.
I mean, I miss that. I miss going
Hmm.
to the bookstore, just walking through the stacks and just pulling out books and taking a look at them and like flipping through a few pages. Like, with Amazon, with any of the stuff online, you have to know what you want. You go there looking for something specific. You can't really browse. It was the same thing with like music stores. Like I loved going to music stores and just, you know, what's new, what's come out,
Hmm.
hey, can I take a listen to this or whatever? And then you buy something, whereas you just can't do that anymore.
Well, thank you for
Um,
libraries. You can still
yeah,
browse there,
yeah.
and
Um,
we're in some libraries too. We try to get the paper into libraries.
okay, cool. Look, I will put the links in the description. Thank you very much again, James and Rob. It was great talking to you. If you guys have any social media, please let me know, or if you want to let
Yeah,
people know now, and I'll
for
put
me,
that in the
you can
description as
find
well.
my
And
cartoons either at my website, robrogers.com, or you can also find me on a thing called Tiny View, which is an app for your phone. I'm also on Patreon and Substack both, so you can look me up there.
right, I'll put those in. And anyways, thank you both for coming on. Thanks everyone for
Thank
listening,
you.
and I'll be back.